Hello and welcome to Customer Experience Leaders Chat by Nicereply, where we talk to support professionals from all over the world and discuss what's behind their team's success. This interview is brought to you by Nicereply, an all-in-one customer satisfaction tool that helps you measure and improve the quality of your customer service. My name is Craig Stoss, and I am here today with Justin Rice, the Senior Lead of Escalated Support at Shopify. Justin, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Craig.
Justin, your background is in building out the escalated support strategy at Shopify. We're here today to talk about tiering and escalated support, and I'd love to start with getting your opinion on when should a company choose to tier their support team?
Yeah. So my own context on tiering is kind of the tiering between frontline and technical support teams. And I think there's a couple of key times when we'd want to look at tiering. So the first is kind of when you need depth on a particular topic. And then here we could see, the types of questions that merchants or customers may have requires some additional depth in order for them to be successful. The other time would be if the breadth of knowledge is just too broad for a generalist role. And that's where some either specialization or tiering can be helpful. And then another case is where people on your team are developing more specialized skills or finding new ways to have an impact, and actually having them dedicated on that type of work can be really beneficial for your team. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean tiering. Again, a specialized model can work there, but I think tiering is one of the ways that that can support that. So those are kind of the main things that I would look at when considering whether to tier. And then another case that is when you have things that are access controlled, you need a smaller group of people with a bit more oversight to manage a particular process or something like that.
You highlighted several reasons there why you might want to tier or not tier. So given that, what are the things you should look at in order to make that decision, and what are the advantages of tiering?
For sure. So when we're looking at most board decisions like this, I think it's helpful to look at the cost, quality, and availability as kind of your trifecta. So what is the cost of having a generalist model versus some tiering? Do you need a high quality bar with people focused in that area? And then what does that mean for your availability of service? A tiered team tends to be smaller, particularly when you're starting out. So do you need that skill set available consistently? And so those are kind of like three things I would say to look at when considering this. And equally as important as if you should tier is kind of how you should tier. So I'm a big believer that tier when it's useful, but stay horizontal as much as possible. And then in terms of positives for tiering, I think it really comes to, it's an opportunity to give clear progression for people's careers. It's a way to, mark some lines around more responsibility and clear expectations. And then for people on different levels, it's helpful for them to not get bogged down on super difficult or super specific issues. So if you're on the front line, you might be seeing issues that require a ton of time or a ton of context to solve effectively. So one of the positives of tiering is that you have that next level of support that you can rely on for that additional context, whether that's a handoff, whether that's pulling them to the problem, but it helps unblock people. And then I think it can also be helpful to have some tiering and titling when navigating the relationship with product teams. So for example, if you have, the title of technical support or, whatever the title may be as that second line, it can help kind of signal to product teams, to engineering that, you own a particular domain, you have a particular skill set, and that's why you're at the table. So I think it's helpful for some of those conversations as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. Having that differentiation in titles absolutely brings clarity both inside the team, but cross-functionally lends itself to, who does the different things and who might have a different level of expertise. But given that you have to have all these distinguishing factors, how do you align with each of these roles and make sure that the tasks are understood by each member of the team?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think a lot of it will depend on the types of work that the team is handling. I think things like access controls make it much clearer. So you run into a line where you can't take it any further. That's very clear cut. But there's going to be other cases that are much blurrier. I think technical support is definitely can be one of those cases. So I would say things like clear job titles, team FAQ docs, onboarding, regular communication between the tiers is really helpful. So we would do kind of intro talks, kind of share what's the scope of our team. These are the types of problems you can send over to us, that kind of thing. But I think it's likely that there's going to always be some blur between the tiers. And I think it's helpful to be really clear about the lines that shouldn't be crossed. So things like, let's say the frontline team shouldn't log issues directly with engineering. That might, just for example. But I think it's also helpful then where there is that blurry space to have some feedback and calibration between the tiers so that we can adjust as we go. But then also create the space to support people when they want to go the extra mile. So if it is, in that blurry space of, some additional troubleshooting, how can you make it safe to go the extra mile? I think it's helpful to kind of empower that frontline tier. And it also helps you identify potential future candidates within the team as well. So I would say it's helpful to draw those clear lines, but also having that ongoing calibration.
You brought up again the professional development benefit, and you had said that earlier as a positive of tiering. But you also have suggested that tiering might not be the only path towards making a system like this work. So I'd be interested in understanding, how do you build the professional development in a situation where you aren't going to tier? What are the mechanisms to make that work?
Yeah, I think it is possible. I think for me, career pathing and a sense of progress in your career, I think, is the helpful piece. So it's everything from creating opportunities to kind of stretch into that new box, all the way through to having a senior title and the recognition and the responsibility that comes along with that. And I don't think that tiering is necessarily the only way to do that. And I think there are real drawbacks to tiering and focusing on titles. For example, typically when you make something someone's title, that thing stops being everybody else's job. So it's very easy to say, oh, that's so-and-so's, I'll just hand it off to them. I don't need to learn about that or worry about that. But I think the thing to look at in terms of career progression is creating those opportunities for people to take on harder work, encouraging that, making it safe for them to do so, and then providing clear recognition when they do step into that new box. That might not be a tier. That could be a title on the same team. That could be joining another tier. But I do think the recognition piece is helpful, one, for their own growth and kind of just positive recognition. And then if they are going to be taking on additional responsibility, it's helpful for the people that they're interacting with to know what their responsibilities are. They have that kind of interface point.
Yeah, so it's clear that the individuals have a benefit here and could get more clarity and more career path progression. But how about at the team level? What are the types of success factors that you measure to make sure that your tiering is having the intended outcomes that you want and bringing value to your customers?
Yeah, so I would look at the outcomes that your merchants or customers need from your team. That's where I would start. I think the two metrics I would look at first are your CSAT or kind of voice of the customer. Are they getting higher quality outcomes that matter to them, or does the business get the higher quality outcomes as well? And then looking at for those topics that do go to the next tier, what is their total life cycle? So what is the first response time? What is the close time? What is the CSAT? So I think, and I think that's an important point to look at the full life cycle KPIs, not just individual teams. Because one thing I've seen happen is that, say the frontline team can be, really successful. Everything's going great. They get faster. But once something goes up to the second line team, maybe they're really underwater and they're struggling. And if you don't have that life cycle measure, it's going to be really easy for, those two different tiers to start, blaming the other one or anything like that. And if you're optimizing for a part and not the whole, you're not actually going to get the outcomes that your customer actually cares about. So for example, they care about their cases resolved. Yes, they do care about the time to response there, but their ultimate concern is this resolved? And I think that's a reason to look at those life cycle KPIs. And then going back to that trifecta, it needs to be weighed against the quality, the availability, and the cost, as well, just for the business case.
You talked a little about what customers expect as outcomes from a tiered model or from a team in general. So maybe we'll wrap up with, how does tiering benefit the customer?
I think it can. And I think it's a really important part to understand really what outcomes your customers need. I would say it comes back to looking and understanding what your customers really need. And I would also say that it really depends on what types of cases they need resolved. And then consider, are you organized to do that effectively? So tiering may help in some cases. Tiering may be the wrong thing to do in other cases. I don't think tiering is inherently beneficial to customers, but it depends on that context and those outcomes. Again, I think something like access controls, that might actually not be better for that individual customer, but it might be the right thing for your business because it needs a bit more oversight to make sure we're doing the right thing and making the right trade-offs. I think my parting thoughts on this would be to also set tripwires for when tiering stops working. It's really easy to kind of set it and forget it, but I do think it's really important to have those lifecycle KPIs and understand what would it look like if this stopped serving us. Because it, like org changes and these designs, you're solving one problem and you're creating another one somewhere else. It's just which trade-off you want to have. So I think having those tripwires for when we need to reevaluate this, what are some early warning signs that we need to recalibrate is a helpful thing to bake into these decisions as well.
Justin, I love the view that you've brought here that tiering has a lot of benefit, but it's also something that has to be constantly evaluated and understood and used in the right situations to make sure you're driving the right customer outcomes. It's clearly not as easy as slapping a new title onto a set of people. And it's really great the success you've brought to Shopify with this program. So thank you so much for sharing with us, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you all for listening to Customer Experience Leaders Chat by Nicereply with today's guest, Justin Reist from Shopify. Make sure to check out our other support interviews and more quality content at nicereply.com.